There's a specific pattern in how most people approach change. They identify something they want, establish it as a target, create a timeline, then judge themselves based on whether they hit that precise mark at that precise time. This seems logical. It feels like planning. It's actually a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. The problem isn't ambition, it's the framework. By anchoring your identity and effort to a specific endpoint, you've created a binary system where you're either succeeding or failing at every moment. You're traveling toward something that doesn't exist yet, which means your current position is always deficient by definition. This creates chronic dissatisfaction. You're never where you should be. You're always behind or ahead of schedule. You're constantly measuring the gap between current reality and imagined future. That measurement becomes your primary relationship with effort. Niccolò Machiavelli operated from different assumptions. He wasn't chasing destinations. He was accumulating capacity. He wasn't aiming at specific endpoints. He was building positional advantage that would generate multiple opportunities. He wasn't measuring progress against predetermined timelines. He was assessing whether each move strengthened or weakened his position. This orientation changes everything. When you're not locked onto a specific target, you can respond to emerging opportunities that weren't visible when you started. When you're not committed to a fixed timeline, you can adjust based on actual conditions rather than arbitrary deadlines. When you're not defining success as hitting a predetermined mark, you can recognize value in outcomes that differ from your original specifications. Most people never question the goal framework because it's universally promoted. Every self-help system, every productivity method, every coaching program starts with goal setting. What do you want to achieve becomes the foundational question, and once you've answered it, you've locked yourself into a specific trajectory that may or may not align with opportunities that emerge as you move. The alternative isn't aimless wandering. It's not abandoning ambition or accepting mediocrity. It's replacing destination fixation with directional movement. It's shifting from "I must reach this specific point" to "I will consistently move in this general direction while remaining responsive to conditions." This framework is harder to explain because it lacks the clean simplicity of goal setting. It's easier to understand than it is to articulate. But it's also more resilient, more adaptive, and ultimately more effective than rigid endpoint fixation. Type this in the comments. I move directionally, not desperately. Let's examine what's actually happening when you set a goal. You're experiencing dissatisfaction with current conditions. Something isn't as you want it to be. That discomfort is information. Your system is signaling misalignment between your values and your circumstances. Most people respond to this signal by creating an imagined future where the discomfort doesn't exist. If they're financially stressed, they imagine financial security. If they're physically uncomfortable, they imagine fitness. If they're socially isolated, they imagine connection. The imagined future becomes the goal. This seems reasonable until you examine the psychological mechanics. By creating that imagined future, you've confirmed that your present is insufficient. You've encoded the message. Where I am now is the problem. Where I want to be is the solution. Your entire emotional relationship with effort becomes about escaping inadequacy rather than building capability. This creates a specific problem. The goal never gets closer. No matter how much progress you make, the gap between current and desired state remains psychologically constant because you're measuring from your current position. You lose 20 pounds, the goal is another 20. You earn more money, the goal adjusts upward. You improve your relationships, you notice areas that still need work. The goal functions as a moving target that maintains constant distance. This isn't accidental. It's how the human brain processes aspiration when anchored to specific endpoints. You're always insufficient relative to the imagined ideal, which means effort is always motivated by inadequacy rather than capacity building. Machiavelli understood something about human psychology that modern goal setting ignores. Motivation based on escaping pain is fundamentally different from motivation based on accumulating power. The first is reactive, desperate, brittle. The second is proactive, deliberate, resilient. When you're trying to escape inadequacy, failure is catastrophic. It confirms your worst fear, that you're stuck where you are. When you're accumulating capability, setbacks are information. They reveal where your strategy needs adjustment, but they don't threaten your identity because your identity isn't tied to reaching a specific endpoint. This distinction changes how you relate to effort. In the goal framework, effort is the price you pay to escape your current inadequate state. In the capacity framework, effort is how you build power regardless of specific outcomes. One is desperate, the other is deliberate. Most people never examine this distinction. They accept the goal framework as obviously correct, then spend years experiencing the chronic dissatisfaction it generates without recognizing that the framework itself is the problem. There's a modern phenomenon where people broadcast intentions before demonstrating capability. They announce projects before completing them. They declare transformations before implementing them. They seek validation for plans rather than results. This seems like harmless enthusiasm or even accountability building. It's actually counterproductive for two specific reasons that interact to undermine follow-through. First, announcing intentions triggers reward circuitry prematurely. Your brain releases dopamine in response to positive social feedback about your declared goal. You experience a version of accomplishment before accomplishing anything. This satisfies some of the psychological need that would otherwise drive actual effort. Research on this is clear. People who talk extensively about their intentions are less likely to follow through than those who remain silent. The talking provides enough psychological satisfaction to reduce the urgency of doing. Second, announcement creates resistance. Once you've publicly committed to a specific direction, you've given anyone with objections or doubts a clear target. Some will actively oppose you. Some will passively doubt. Some will unconsciously hope you fail so they don't have to confront their own inaction. This isn't paranoia, it's social dynamics. Your declared transformation implies judgment of those who aren't transforming. Your announced project implies criticism of those who aren't building. Even when you don't intend it, others interpret your actions as commentary on theirs. Machiavelli was explicit about this. Never reveal intentions until revealing them serves strategic purpose. Move in silence. Let results speak. The moment you announce is the moment you create opposition and drain motivation through premature satisfaction. The alternative is simple. Stop announcing. Stop seeking validation for plans. Stop broadcasting intentions. Start demonstrating capability through results. Let people discover what you've built rather than what you're planning to build. This feels uncomfortable because it removes the social reward for having good intentions. You don't get credit for planning. You don't get encouragement for declaring. You only get recognition for demonstrating, which means the recognition is earned rather than granted for enthusiasm. Most people can't handle this. They need the social reward for declaring because that's the primary motivation. They're not actually driven by the outcome. They're driven by the social validation of being someone who pursues ambitious outcomes. When you stop announcing, you discover whether you actually want the thing or just want the social credit for pursuing it. That discovery is clarifying. Every specific outcome you become emotionally attached to is a lever someone else can use to control you. The more you need a particular result, the more negotiating power others have over you. The more desperate you are for a specific endpoint, the weaker your position becomes. This is basic leverage dynamics. In any negotiation, the party that needs the deal least has the most power. In any competition, the participant who's most comfortable walking away holds the advantage. In any pursuit, the person who's least attached to one specific version of success has the most options. Goal setting creates attachment. You've decided that this specific outcome, achieved by this specific time, is what success means. Now you're vulnerable. Anyone who controls variables that affect that outcome can manipulate you. Any circumstances that threaten that timeline can destabilize you. Any alternative that doesn't match your specifications feels like failure. Machiavelli operated in an environment where rigid attachment to specific outcomes was fatal. Plans changed, alliances shifted, opportunities emerged that required abandoning previous strategies. The leaders who survived were those who remained flexible enough to adapt while maintaining clear directional intent. This is the distinction most people miss. Directional clarity without outcome attachment. You can know what direction you're moving, toward greater capability, toward better positioning, toward accumulated resources, without specifying exactly what the endpoint looks like. This flexibility is power. When you're not attached to one specific version of success, you can recognize value in multiple different outcomes. You can pivot when circumstances change. You can seize opportunities that don't match your original specifications, but advance your interests nonetheless. The rigid goal setter keeps pursuing the original target even when it stops making sense. They've invested so much identity in that specific outcome that changing course feels like failure. They'd rather pursue an obsolete goal than admit their specifications need updating. This rigidity is weakness disguised as determination. Real strength is maintaining clear values and direction while remaining flexible about specific implementations. You know what matters to you. You know what direction builds power. But you're not locked into one expression of that direction. This requires emotional discipline. You have to distinguish between the underlying value, what you actually care about, and the specific manifestation you've become attached to. Most goals are really about underlying values: security, freedom, recognition, impact. But people fixate on one specific way to achieve those values, then become brittle when that path encounters obstacles. The alternative is holding your values firmly while remaining flexible about paths. Most personal development advice assumes comfort is the goal. It teaches you to pursue outcomes that will make life easier, more pleasant, more secure. It frames difficulty as something to minimize and comfort as something to maximize. This seems obviously correct until you examine what it produces. Comfort-seeking creates fragility. When you organize your life around minimizing discomfort, you lose capacity to handle unavoidable challenges. When you pursue goals primarily to achieve easier circumstances, you're training yourself that difficult conditions are problems rather than opportunities. Machiavelli observed that leaders who prioritized comfort over capability consistently failed under pressure. They'd optimized for pleasant circumstances, then collapsed when circumstances became unpleasant. They'd built strategies that required favorable conditions, then had no resources when conditions turned hostile. The alternative is becoming someone who's comfortable being uncomfortable, not pursuing difficulty for its own sake, but recognizing that capacity is built through resistance, not through its absence. That strength comes from handling challenges, not from avoiding them. This reorients how you think about goals. Instead of, I want to achieve X so life becomes easier, you think, I want to build capacity to handle Y level of difficulty. The first makes you dependent on favorable circumstances. The second makes you resilient regardless of circumstances. Consider financial goals. Most people frame them as, I want enough money to be comfortable, secure. This creates attachment to specific amounts and circumstances. The alternative is, I want to build capacity to generate resources under various conditions. The first is brittle. It depends on maintaining specific circumstances. The second is anti-fragile. It strengthens through challenge. This applies everywhere. Physical goals framed as reaching comfortable conditions create dependence on those conditions. Physical capacity framed as handling increasing resistance creates ongoing development. Relationship goals framed as achieving comfortable dynamics create fragility when conflict emerges. Relationship capacity framed as handling difficult conversations creates resilience. The shift is subtle but profound. You stop trying to reach a state where things are easy. You start building capacity to handle things when they're hard. You stop pursuing goals that promise comfort. You start developing capabilities that function under stress. This is psychologically harder because it removes the promise of eventual ease. You're not working toward a future where effort stops. You're building capacity that allows greater effort. Most people reject this because they want the fairy tale. Work hard now, coast later. That's not how capability works. There's a fundamental difference between aiming at a target and positioning yourself where opportunities naturally flow. The first requires you to predict the future accurately. The second requires you to understand how systems work and place yourself in advantageous locations within them. Target-oriented thinking asks, what specific outcome do I want? Then it attempts to calculate the path from here to there. This fails whenever conditions change, which is constantly. You've optimized for a specific future that may not materialize. Position-oriented thinking asks, where are valuable opportunities being generated? Then it focuses on occupying those positions. You're not predicting specific outcomes. You're placing yourself where multiple good outcomes become possible. Machiavelli understood this distinction intimately. He didn't try to predict which specific political arrangements would emerge. He positioned himself to be valuable to whoever ended up in power. He didn't aim at one specific role. He built capabilities that would be useful across various scenarios. This is strategic rather than tactical thinking. Tactical thinking optimizes for specific known objectives. Strategic thinking optimizes for classes of objectives within uncertain environments. The first is more precise but more brittle. The second is less precise but more resilient. Applied practically. Instead of, I want to work at company X in role Y, you think, I want to develop skills that are scarce and valuable across multiple contexts. Instead of, I want to earn X by date Y, you think, I want to understand how value flows in this domain and position myself in that flow. Instead of, I want relationship configuration X, you think, I want to develop capacity for relationships that create mutual growth. The difference is specificity of endpoint versus specificity of direction. Goal setting requires endpoint specificity, exact amount, exact date, exact configuration. Position building requires directional specificity, clear understanding of what kind of value you're building and where that value is useful. One locks you onto a single trajectory. The other allows you to recognize and pursue multiple valuable trajectories as they emerge. One requires the future to match your predictions. The other allows you to respond to the future as it actually unfolds. Most people default to goal setting because it's simpler to articulate and easier to measure. But simplicity of measurement isn't the same as effectiveness of approach. The clearest metrics aren't always attached to the most successful strategies. Most effort is structured linearly. More input produces proportionally more output. Work twice as long, get twice as much done. Practice twice as much, improve twice as fast. This seems fair and predictable. It's also limiting. Leverage is different. Small inputs produce disproportionate outputs. Small changes in position generate large changes in results. Small improvements in key capabilities multiply across multiple applications. Goals tend to be linear. I will work X hours and achieve Y result. This creates a direct relationship between effort and outcome that feels controllable. But it also caps your results based on available effort. You can only work so many hours. Linear returns mean finite ceilings. Leverage-oriented thinking asks, where can small changes produce large effects? It looks for multipliers rather than direct relationships. Where can building one capability unlock multiple opportunities? Where can one strategic relationship provide access to entire networks? Where can one piece of infrastructure eliminate recurring costs? Machiavelli consistently thought in leverage terms. He didn't try to do everything himself. He identified where small positions of influence would allow control over larger resources. He didn't pursue goals linearly. He looked for positions where he could influence outcomes disproportionate to his direct power. This requires different strategic thinking. Instead of asking, how much effort will this require? You ask, what's the multiplier effect here? Instead of optimizing for working harder, you optimize for making each unit of effort count for more. Technology provides obvious examples. Building a system once that runs repeatedly. Creating content once that reaches people continuously. Developing skills that apply across multiple domains. Each of these has leverage built in. The same effort generates ongoing or multiplied returns. But leverage exists in analog domains too. Reputation is leverage. One demonstration of capability creates opportunities beyond that instance. Networks are leverage. One strong relationship provides access to many others. Systems are leverage. Building a process once eliminates recurring effort. Goal thinking tends to miss leverage opportunities because it's focused on direct paths to specific endpoints. It optimizes for getting from A to B efficiently. Leverage thinking optimizes for getting to B while simultaneously strengthening position for getting to C, D, and E. The first gets you to your goal. The second builds compounding capability. The most valuable capability isn't executing one specific plan perfectly. It's adjusting to changed conditions while maintaining directional progress. Rigid execution of obsolete plans is discipline applied stupidly. Flexible adaptation while maintaining clear intent is discipline applied intelligently. Goals create rigidity. You've committed to specific outcomes through specific methods. When conditions change, and they always do, you face a dilemma. Do you abandon the goal? Feels like failure? Or continue pursuing it despite changed conditions? Often stupid, but feels consistent. Direction-based movement is inherently adaptive. You're committed to moving in a particular direction and building specific types of capacity, but you're not committed to one path. When obstacles appear, you route around them. When opportunities emerge, you incorporate them. When conditions change, you adjust while maintaining general bearing. Machiavelli wrote extensively about this. He compared rigid rulers to trees in storms. They break. Flexible leaders to reeds. They bend and survive. The victory isn't in executing your original plan despite obstacles. It's in achieving your objectives despite conditions requiring different methods than you anticipated. This requires distinguishing between core intent and specific implementation. Your core intent might be building financial security, but the specific path to that, this job, this investment, this timeline, is implementation detail. When implementations stop working, you change them without questioning the intent. Most people can't make this distinction. They've fused the goal and the method into one thing. I want to build wealth becomes, I want this specific job to work out, becomes, I need to succeed at this exact approach. Now they're psychologically locked into one path, and failure of that path threatens their entire objective. The alternative is holding intent firmly, while remaining flexible about implementation. You know what you're building. You're committed to that direction, but you're not committed to one specific expression of it. This allows you to be opportunistic rather than rigid, to recognize value in outcomes that differ from original specifications, to pivot when circumstances require it without feeling like you've failed. Rigidity is often mistaken for determination. Real determination is maintaining direction through changing conditions. That requires adaptation, not stubborn adherence to obsolete specifications. The goal setter who refuses to adjust looks determined. The direction mover who pivots repeatedly while making consistent progress is actually determined. All of this collapses into one question. What does this actually look like in practice? How do you operate without goals? You start by identifying values and directions that matter to you. Not specific endpoints, but general territories. Financial capability, physical capacity, intellectual development, relationship depth, creative expression. Whatever actually matters to you as ongoing development rather than fixed achievement. Then you assess current position relative to those directions. Where are you now? What capabilities do you currently have? What positions do you occupy? This is realistic inventory, without judgment about whether it's sufficient. Then you identify next moves that strengthen your position or build relevant capacity. Not what gets me to the endpoint, but what strengthens me in this direction. What skill development would be valuable? What strategic relationships would provide leverage? What systems would compound over time? You implement those moves while remaining attentive to feedback. Are they actually strengthening your position? Are you building real capability? Are new opportunities emerging? Are conditions changing in ways that suggest different moves? You adjust based on actual results rather than predetermined plans. Something's not working? Change it without drama. New opportunity appears? Evaluate whether it aligns with your direction. Conditions shift. Adjust your approach while maintaining general bearing. This is simpler than goal achievement in some ways. You're not managing complex timelines or measuring against specific targets. But it's more demanding in other ways. You have to maintain clear directional intent without external validation of goal achieved. You have to assess whether you're actually building capacity rather than just checking boxes. You have to remain honest about whether your moves are strengthening your position or just keeping you busy. Machiavelli operated this way throughout his career. He wasn't chasing specific roles. He was building capabilities that would be valuable across various scenarios. He wasn't committed to one specific path to influence. He was committed to accumulating influence through whatever paths emerged. This made him resilient when circumstances changed. Other advisors who'd optimized for specific roles lost everything when those roles disappeared. Machiavelli's capabilities remained valuable regardless of which specific position he occupied. You can operate the same way. Stop optimizing for specific endpoints. Start building capabilities and positions that generate options. Stop measuring progress against predetermined targets. Start assessing whether you're actually stronger, more capable, better positioned than you were previously. The shift is subtle. The results compound. The goal framework isn't wrong because it never works. It's limiting because it forces you into binary success-failure thinking while making you rigid in the face of changing conditions. It creates chronic dissatisfaction by anchoring your identity to endpoints you haven't reached. It makes you vulnerable by creating specific attachments others can leverage. The directional alternative isn't abandoning ambition. It's reconceiving how ambition operates. You maintain clear intent about what you're building. You remain committed to developing specific types of capability. But you release attachment to specific endpoints reached through specific timelines. This makes you more adaptive. When conditions change, you adjust without experiencing identity crisis. When opportunities emerge that differ from your specifications, you can evaluate them based on whether they advance your interests, rather than whether they match your predetermined goal. This makes you more resilient. Setbacks don't threaten your entire objective. They're just information about what's not working that requires adjustment. Failures of specific approaches don't equal failure of general direction. This makes you less controllable. People who need specific outcomes are vulnerable to anyone who can influence those outcomes. People who are building capability across multiple applications are less dependent on any single path. The shift requires abandoning some comfortable illusions. That you can predict the future accurately enough to set precise targets. That reaching those targets will satisfy the underlying need driving them. That progress should be linear and measurable against predetermined specifications. What you gain is operational flexibility, combined with clear directional intent. You know what you're building. You're committed to that direction, but you're not locked into one specific expression of it. This allows you to be opportunistic rather than rigid, to recognize value in multiple different outcomes, to adjust to conditions without losing momentum. Machiavelli succeeded not by achieving specific goals, but by accumulating power and influence through whatever paths emerged. His magnum opus was written in exile, a circumstance that would have destroyed someone attached to specific endpoints. He used changed conditions as opportunity because he wasn't rigidly committed to one path. You can operate the same way. Stop chasing destinations. Start building direction. Type this commitment: I build capacity, not checkpoints. If this framework provided value, engage and share. The goal-setting industry won't promote this. It undermines their entire model.